and welcome again. Back in video number 18, I spoke about the concept of trial by jury. At one point I referenced Scottish philosopher and historian David Hume, who said of trial by jury, quote, "an institution admirable in itself and the best calculated for the preservation of liberty and the administration of justice that was ever devised by the wit of man," unquote. I recommend revisiting that video for the many points of law that it makes clear. As the resistance to the current tyrannical regime gathers support and momentum, there are many voices raised about how best to deal with the injustices which abound. People can be heard saying, "See here, others, lo, there, we have the answer." Or, "All we need is a new constitution. Let's have a convention or three and draft one on democratic principles." Presumably, this latter viewpoint would eventually produce a mishmash of various rights which would be the result of competing opinions selected by majority vote, many of which would actually consist of the violation of some individuals' rights, natural-born rights, in order to provide coercively enforced privileges on others, paid for by property extracted from the losing factions. In other words, virtually exactly what we have today, with just a temporary rotation of the ones paying or receiving. That this would certainly be the outcome of such conferences is due to the fact that very, very few people understand the principles underlying just governance and constitutional law. As pointed out in the beginning of this series, there are far too many people who don't even understand that the British Commonwealth has a constitution. Many others who do have a basic understanding still labour under the illusion that constitutional law can be drafted and enacted by Parliament. Even many in the political and judicial systems believe such demonstrable falsehoods, citing the 1688-89 Bill of Rights as an example of constitutional law, which it is absolutely not, nor ever can be. That's because, as we must never tire of reiterating, a constitution is an ironclad series of restrictions on what those placed in positions of administration or public service can do before they step outside of their legitimate functions and act unlawfully. Such laws are administered and enforced by the population. In the British Commonwealth's case, those denoted as Crown subjects. Any changes to constitutional law can only be done with the expressed consent of the subjects in total. A parliament or legislature may not enact legislation which infringes the inalienable rights of the subjects, who need a mechanism for hauling back into legitimacy the government whenever it does so. This is the role of the monarch, who is held to account for their purposes in the structure by Magna Carta, and specifically Article 61. When considering the number of legislative infringements committed by parliaments over the centuries, it's amazing that Article 61 hasn't been invoked every few years. That lack of supervision is a testament to two things. One, the skill of those manipulating the minds of the population to the point of inertia when their rights are infringed by those who gain an obvious advantage from this. And two, the tendency of most people to overlook minor infringements due to laziness, lack of intelligence, or preoccupation with everyday worldly cares, which deter them from devoting enough time or energy to these most important issues. Constitutional student William Keyte recently conducted a Zoom meeting with a new political grouping known as the Love Group, which I reference here, and recommend viewing. There are one or two very brief moments where it might be assumed that Will is perhaps letting off offending bureaucrats and police and judicial officers with just a word from the referee, when a yellow card would seem more appropriate. But we have to recall that some of those people have been well indoctrinated, as have we all. And there are many cases where there are grey areas that need to be approached with subtlety. The important point to remember with the law is that malicious intent has to be established before a jury can impose any punishment or censure. Our primary role in enabling this is to keep on informing the offenders and recording the evidence via the lawful notices process, so that eventually there won't be plausible deniability before their own juries. The main thrust of Will's presentation here is that we are all responsible for getting our thinking straightened out if we want to establish a free and prosperous society. It's not just the responsibility of those we like to condemn as evil conspirators who want to oppress us, but we must do our own shadow work so that we are fit to take our place as jurors or judges worthy of the responsibility when that time arrives. By shadow work, we mean working on those darker areas which lurk within us all, our prejudices, biases, those corners we all like to cut when confronting our own failings. We need to be able to de-indoctrinate ourselves before we can serve as effective examples to those we seek to admonish. Then we can lead by example, which is the only real way to lead. The great thing about trial by jury is that the process itself causes a lot of this shadow work to happen. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. Those who are abusing our constitutional rights by presiding as judges and magistrates often seek those positions because they fear contemplating a society where individual subjects govern themselves, as is everyone's natural born right. There's a popular school of thought which opines that many magistrates and judges hold the view that most people can't be trusted to remain within the law unless constantly supervised and punished with one-size-fits-all type legislation for every little infraction. Is it just a fortunate coincidence that the revenue provided from these cases seems to go some way to providing most of the practitioners within our current legal and judicial system a comfortable living, making it unlikely that they will be willing to do their own shadow work concerning the personal venal advantages to themselves of their actions? We can each form our own opinions on that one. What appears certain from the above logic is that these judicial officers, frequently called control freaks, greatest fear is that under a trial by jury system, those of a tyrannical disposition would be completely unable to enforce unjust legislation because of the jury's power of annulment. They claim, of course, that the average person is too stupid or corrupt to be entrusted with the responsibility to become an actual judge, which is the juror's true role. It is therefore vital that enough people show themselves to be mature enough to be so entrusted, which is why we must do this shadow work and assist as many others as we can to do likewise. Nevertheless, the main reason these judicial officers give for opposing the proper constitutional exercise of trial by jury often involves the use of the words anarchy and chaos, as if those two are synonyms. Their worldview is characterized by this two-dimensional representation, in which there is the false dichotomy of enforced authority or complete lawlessness. They distort the word anarchy from its true meaning of the rule of none, which does not imply no rule at all, but may equally imply that if there is a rule, it be the rule of law, not men upon men. This they conflate to one of everyone doing whatever they like with no regard whatsoever to the rights of others, which of course would be chaos, but would not be anarchy. Why not? Because in the state envisaged by Hobbes, where everyone was in a state of war with everyone else, it's inevitable that those who were most ruthless in their ambitions would soon establish autocracy over at least their local areas or dominions, leading to interminable conflicts about political power. Somehow that has a familiar ring. It isn't hard to see why proponents and beneficiaries of a top-down enforced administration favour that status quo continuing. It establishes a ruling class, entry to which can be made difficult and expensive, but which is rewarding and self-perpetuating for its members. Everyone else is consigned to lower rungs on a social hierarchy and taught from birth that this is how society is organised and they will be better off if they just comply. In essence, the legalese system is one of the last vestiges of the old craft guild system. Even the name bar guild gives the game away. However, the craft guild system, which was sold to society as a means of guaranteeing everyone an allotted space in the economic and social structure, was replaced by the agrarian and industrial revolutions, which swept all before them, basically during the reign of George III, 1760 to 1820, and shortly afterwards. That happened because new ideas about productivity and political structure gained unstoppable momentum in a classic demonstration of the Victor Hugo quote, "Nothing has more power than an idea whose time has come," unquote. The ancient Greeks frequently stated the axiom that there were always three alternatives. The true situation of a peaceful, lawful society thus sits as a third alternative between the two already shown, in this manner. The stodgy, sclerotic legalese system, which has held society back for centuries, must now be challenged by the revival of an understanding amongst the general population of the value of constitutional law, which has to be based upon an understanding of moral law. When that is accomplished, a new era of abundance, far more wide-ranging than even the economic abundance brought forth by the emergence of capitalism over feudalism, can occur. How is this to be done? It must begin with the people demanding trial by jury as a means of establishing true democracy or rule by the people. Naturally, those running the legalese system don't want that, but there are steps that individual subjects can take to help start the ball rolling. The first of these is for people who are called to jury service to realise that juries still have, as they've always had, the power of annulment. That power has never been repealed. Indeed, as an integral part of the Constitution in Magna Carta, Article 39, it cannot be repealed. An individual juror sequestered in the jury room with their fellows can explain to them that despite what the judge may have told them about having to follow his or her directions, they can still acquit someone technically guilty of a legislative offence if they are convinced that no harm has been done, i.e. there is no victim, there was no malicious aforethought in the accused actions, and their consciences tell them the legislation which flagged the case is inherently unjust. An excellent video on the commonlawconstitution.org website contains an inspiring story of how this principle was put into play in a case in the United States. The judge attempted to conceal from the jury the power of annulment that they possessed when pressed by the defence attorney to have that revealed to them. Indeed, citing the old bogey of chaos or anarchy, if that were allowed. However, he conceded that if the jury could work it out for themselves, that he, the judge, would have to abide by their decision. So that is our first tool. We must let as many people as possible know that jurors are not lawfully bound by a judge's unlawful concealment of the facts of law. One word of advice, though, to any who are thus called to jury service: keep quiet about it before the jury is selected. Only reveal your knowledge of the principle once sequestered in the jury room, or you'll not be selected, maybe even removed from the jury on some pretext if it becomes known to the judiciary that you know the true law. This is a long process we're embarked upon, so it's important to maintain our focus and never tire of talking to people about our Constitution and our commitment to it. Let's always be learning. Thank you for watching.